Now from WATN, it's Local 24 This Week with Richard Ransom.
Welcome to Local 24 This Week, where every Sunday at 9 a.m. and 10:35 p.m. we are here to bring you the real story behind the big stories. As we gear up to sit around the table this week with family and friends, here's what's on our plate for today. City Council's last hurrah. A new City Council will take office next year, but outgoing members left their mark, approving a referendum on residency requirements and rate increases for your trash pickup and MLGW gas and water rates. Getting Tennessee's pulse on a score of issues, a new Vanderbilt poll says a lot about what's on Tennessee's mind these days. And Governor Lee's first year, whether you agree or disagree, from school vouchers to criminal justice reform and 10-care reform to the new governor remains the state's most popular politician. Joining me for today's conversation today is Reverend Ken Whalen of the New Olivet Worship Center and Local 24 political analyst and commentator Otis Sanford. And gentlemen, I want to start off with the last topic first today, if we can. As I mentioned, Governor Bill Lee wrapping up his first year in office. And earlier this week, I went to Nashville for a one-on-one interview with him to talk about his first year. Let's watch, and then I'll get your reaction on the other side. All right.
It's been the most remarkable experience of my life this year.
Governor Bill Lee says he's looking back at year one with no regrets.
You know, I can't really think of things I would do differently.
Not even his school voucher bill, which critics say was rushed through, leading to unnecessary confusion for voters and FBI investigations into how it was passed. For Lee, it's a deep conviction. It's just the right thing to do.
You know, change is hard for people. It scares people. They don't know how to trust that change. But I think once people realize that the real motive here is kids.
I asked him about removing the bust of Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest from the state capitol, something this week's Vanderbilt poll shows 76% of Tennesseans now support. Tonight, the governor tiptoed through his only stated position so far to leave the issue up to a commission that meets next February.
This individual actually, you know, the history that he's associated with is particularly painful to one sector of our society or to a lot of folks in our society. So I think I'm grateful that we're moving forward with that broader conversation. It's going to happen. Something will get done.
Even on an issue as divisive as the president's impeachment, this Republican governor is more comfortable walking the line, choosing not to defend either side, but to criticize both sides for their partisanship.
I don't think it's good for our country. I think our country deserves better, and it saddens me to watch it.
And we also talked about 10-care reform, criminal justice reform, too. So he's had a very ambitious year, I think it's fair to say. And so far, Tennesseans seem to like what they see. As part of this Vanderbilt poll that we keep referencing, they asked about the statewide politicians and asked the public to give their job approval rating. And he remains by far the most popular politician in Tennessee with a job approval of 62%. I had to put the state legislatures in there. They're at 56%. Not bad for a state legislature considering the controversy they had this year. Senator Lamar Alexander at 46% and Senator Marsha Blackburn at 44%. So there you go. Your thoughts on the conversation, Otis?
Well, I thought it was very interesting, Richard, and I'm glad that he granted you the interview. I guess the thing that stuck out for me was he's talking about the school voucher bill, which was fraught with a lot of problems, but he has no regrets about it. And then he said that, you know, change is hard for people, so he's trying to help them navigate through this change. Well, change is also hard when it comes to the Forrest bus there. And I don't see him showing the kind of leadership that he needs to show to make that happen. You know, the Forrest bus does not need to be sitting in the rotunda of the Capitol. They're building this brand new Confederate museum up near Columbia, Tennessee. Put it there if you want to put it somewhere. But overall, I mean, I think I would give his first year an average score, B-, C+, somewhere in there, because I do think that he failed to show some leadership in certain areas, but he did some, you know, he did show some leadership, especially in criminal justice reform and some other areas.
All right, what's your take?
Well, two areas that Otis brings up, the vouchers and the Confederate bus.
Now, you're a big supporter of school vouchers.
Absolutely, and I'll save that one for last. So the Confederate bus.
Yes.
I think, and you guys know how I feel about this.
I do.
I think you leave the bus there. The governor, in your interview, the long play of it, he said a very interesting word, context. He said, I think context is very important. I do too, and I think the bust, this is not going to happen, but I think the best thing to do is to leave the bus there and then provide context by adding additional artwork or another statue of some sort to bring context. And I
what
bet
are you going to display? Massacred folks in at Fort Pillow?
Probably. And I bet you if they started talking about doing that, the people who are opposed to removing the bust would say, well, maybe we need to remove the bust, because that is real context. Listen, Richard, Otis, to say you have to remove the bust, and let's forget about that part of history, then the racist portion of our society can say, well, slavery's over too, let's forget about that too. I think it's a very, as you know, I think it's a very, very slippery slope. Now, in terms of context. Now, the voucher bill, the vouchers or ESAs, education savings accounts, are about parental choice. I don't like to use the term vouchers because it's a red flag. It raises a lot of people's antenna. It's about parental choice, and I'm going to be very, very, very involved in School Choice Week coming up in January. We're taking a busload of people to Capitol Hill in Nashville to express support for it. And I think that the Shelby County Democratic delegation, except for John D. Berry, except for him because he's been on the right side all along, but all of the Democratic legislators from Shelby County, all of whom are black, most of whom are black, should be held accountable for opposing the ESAs just because. And they keep saying that the vouchers are going to take money away from the public school system. That is absolutely not true. Why don't they tell voters that for the first 3 years of the voucher program, whatever money leaves with vouchers is coming into the school system? Most people don't know that.
Well, isn't it up to the governor and those who are supporters of that to get that message out?
Absolutely, and that's what we're going to start doing.
Would you concede that it got off to a rough start?
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, yeah, it got off to a rough start because I think people were afraid of the opposition, afraid of the so-called liberal, so-called civil rights army that was raising hell about it. But I think that as time goes on, and I'm glad they went through the controversy because it's going to happen.
Well, but very briefly, though, the rough starts also included questions around Glenn Cassidy twisting the arms of people and maybe giving some plums and incentives for legislators. That's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's probably a legal problem. There's also the issue that nobody has addressed lately is the people who are receiving these vouchers could conceivably be put in a different tax bracket because they may have to pay taxes on that money. Well, that has not been resolved.
Well, according to the governor, those funds will not be taxed. Well, they will be seen as scholarships.
The governor doesn't run the IRS.
Yeah, but he runs the State Department of Education.
Well,
and that's where I think we're going to get into the weeds. And I think because of the legal staff in the governor's office, I think we're going to resolve it before the program takes effect. However, whether or not the funds are taxable, I think is secondary to the hope that is going to be given to parents of children who are stuck in failing schools.
I don't think it's secondary when it comes to the pocketbooks of people who don't have much in the pocketbook.
Well, I don't think
it would have. Got to be careful.
It wouldn't have gotten this far if there were that much of a question about it, but we'll see.
But let me ask you this too. You talk about the Democrats' opposition. There's a lot of Republican opposition to this program. Now, Germantown schools, Collierville schools, Bartlett School, I believe all the suburban districts came out in opposition.
And some rural districts as well. That is, again, the piece about the information. There is a lot of questions because people don't know the details of the legislation. But I'm telling you, there is ample evidence from across the United States where these programs have worked with similar opposition. The difference is that in Tennessee, somehow the lid has been kept on all of the information. And starting in January, I'm telling you, a lot of those questions are going to be answered.
That should have been the governor's responsibility early on. That's all I'm saying.
Let me circle back to the Nathan Bedford Forrest bus controversy. As I mentioned, 76% said yes, statewide, want it removed from the state capitol. Right. 47% said put it in a museum. 29% said don't display it anywhere. It seems to me that that poll result, you have more than 3 out of 4 Tennesseans saying get rid of the bust, gave the governor an opportunity to say, you know what, the more I think about this, the more I hear from folks, let's get rid of the bus. By the way, that's what his predecessor, Bill Haslam, also said.
And Bill Haslam showed some leadership on this. It's just that that commission was just so reluctant to do it. Now we have the chair of the commission at least saying, I'm willing to have a conversation about it. 76% of Tennesseans, that includes a lot of people who may be loving the Confederacy.
A majority of both parties.
Absolutely. So let's not discount that. And all of this issue about putting some more context, that then we'll be crowding out the whole rotunda. The place for this Forest bus to be is not where my tax dollars are being used for the upkeep. The place for this bus is in that place like this new Columbia, Tennessee museum, where the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, I'm told, from Memphis, and the Jefferson Davis statue, I'm told, is going to be there as well. Let's do it. Let's do it that way.
Which begs the question, if 76% of Tennesseans say it ought to be gone, why is it not gone?
Because you don't have the leadership from people like Bill Lee and this commission and the state building commission, who are basically being beholden to a small group of Confederate lovers. That's what's going on.
Or it's because they don't intend to move it anytime soon, because those same people say that Governor Lee is doing a hell of a job. So wait a minute, if it's the same people, why isn't the bus moving? I'll tell you why I think it's not moved. I think it's not moved because they don't have any intention of moving. I think somebody is brewing up a lawsuit, another lawsuit regarding the bus at Capitol Hill, and I don't think it's going anywhere. But if y'all say it's going, it's going. So the 800-pound gorilla is, why is it not gone now?
Wow, that was a really good first segment, but it has to come to an end. We have 2 more segments to go here. We'll be right back.
Visit your Acura dealer for 0.9% APR financing for well-qualified buyers on the 2020 RDX. And now for the fun stuff. The Acura season of performance event. Hurry in.
There's a new pet. The uncontrollably exciting Rick and Morty Chia Pets. And your favorite painter, Bob Ross Chia Pet.
Fantastic.
Just soak your chia, spread the seeds, water, and watch it grow. And what's that? Unicorn and Llama Chia Pets. Wax on, wax off Chia with Karate Kid Chia Pet. And from the hit movie It, Pennywise Chia Pet. Chia Pets, the gift that grows.
At Walgreens, CVS, Target, and Walmart. Makes a great gift.
Together, we can change the news. Find out how at safekids.org.
Today, I'm going to talk to you about physics. Come on in, girls. Let's go. This is the first rocket to get humans to Mars.
Really tall.
I'm a rocket structural engineer, designing and building parts of the rocket. You are the generation that will be stepping foot on Mars. Do I have a group of astronauts on my hands?
Yes.
You can become a rocket scientist or whatever else you want to be.
You're watching Local 24 This Week with Richard Ransom.
In addition to where Tennesseans stand on the Nathan Bedford Forrest bust, some other interesting revelations from this poll that Vanderbilt University conducted and released this past week. Let me throw some of the bigger topics out at you, and it's interesting to me how much in agreement a lot of folks seem to be. First of all, the problem with chemical dependence on alcohol and drugs. 69% of Tennesseans saying that is the biggest problem facing their community, and that includes rural and urban, okay? 86% favor background checks on guns. 58% say that what Trump did in regards to Ukraine was absolutely improper, but 65% say what he did is not worthy of removal from office. So whether you agree or disagree on that particular matter, bottom line is seem to be more in agreement than not. Any of those particular issues stand out to either of you? You want to go first, Evan?
Not really, except that I agree with those who say that the whole Ukraine thing, and I'm going to take it further and say, I think that impeachment is a waste of time, because I think what happens is it strengthens President Trump's hand among his base, and I've said this all along. I think it's a waste of resources. I think that if we're talking about carrying it, and maybe this is why Pelosi is hesitant to turn everything over to the Senate right now. I think that if it goes to a trial in the Senate, we pretty much now know how that's going to turn out, and there's going to be a lot of histrionics. There's going to be a lot of bluster, which is not going to change the minds of Trump's base of supporters. It's only going to make them more enthusiastic about defending him, even if he is guilty.
Well, there are a couple of things that stood out for me on the Vanderbilt poll, and you mentioned them, Richard. 58% that say the Ukraine call was inappropriate. That's a high number for Tennessee. It was not a perfect call, and 58% of the people say so. And this 86% who favor deeper background checks on private gun sales and gun shows, that was a very, very high number as well. But I have to take, as I usually do, a little different view than my friend here.
Well, this would be a boring show if you didn't, so please proceed.
I do not believe that the impeachment is a waste of time. It was important for some statement to be made that this president is not above the law. That's what we're saying. I'm not under some naive assumption that he's going to get convicted in the Senate. We all know that that's not going to happen. But we cannot sit idly by and let this president run roughshod over the Constitution, over the rule of law, and over everything that's decent and proper about what our president should be about. Very next day, he goes to Michigan and talks about the longest-serving senators who I met when I used to live in Detroit, and said he's probably in hell. I mean, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. We cannot sit by and let this president go without some kind of accountability.
Well, if the purpose is to make the statement that you just made, if the whole purpose of the proceedings is to tell the world Donald Trump is no good and he's not above the law and he ought to be in jail, if that's the purpose, okay. But if the purpose is to make sure he gets another 4 years to demonstrate that whatever his negatives are doubly negative, then that's going to be the result.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think there's no guarantee.
Unless he goes to prison. Now, if he goes to prison, it's a fait accompli. But I believe that his base is going to vote even more vociferously for him, even with the statement, which I don't disagree with.
You still need 50%, and there was one number that also came out in that poll that I thought was interesting.
Right.
His approval rating is at 50%, which is lower than it's been, and they noticed a 10% drop of support in the suburban communities of Nashville, Knoxville, and Memphis.
Right.
What do you make of that?
That corresponds perfectly to his vote margin in Tennessee in 2016, which was right at 61%, and the 50% that now approve of his job performance. There's that 10% right there. And 10% in Tennessee can equate to 20% in a Michigan or a Pennsylvania or a Florida or a North Carolina. I mean, I do not believe that this is an automatic ticket to re-election by impeaching him and not removing him. The suburbanites, and they are basically white women in the suburbs, have had their fill of this guy. And what he did to Mrs. Dingell the other day, Congresswoman Dingell, only adds to that. I just think that these numbers are worth looking at even in a state like Tennessee.
Well, I don't disagree that it's despicable. I've never disagreed about the fact that Trump, his tactics are despicable. He ought not be there. All of that's fine. But it still is the fact that he is elected, his base is energized to support him, and we're going to see. They're going to have to have somebody to vote for. They're going to have somebody to vote for against him. The Democratic slate, whoever they choose is going to have an uphill battle to defeat that man. And now you got Bloomberg in the race. Why? Why is Bloomberg in the race?
Well, he was in Memphis, and I was going to bring that up, but we don't have time.
Yeah, oh, wait.
Maybe he'll come and visit again. We'll take a break. We'll talk about City Council, all the shenanigans they were up to this week, right after that.
I'm Local 24 meteorologist Chelsea Chandler. Before you get your kids ready for school each day, make sure you catch my bus stop forecast so they're prepared throughout the day. It's weekdays on Good Day Memphis, 5 to 7.
The bus stop forecast on Good Day Memphis is brought to you by NST.
Yummy lip balm. Yummy lip balm? My lips get so dry and cracked, I need serious relief. That's why I use O'Keeffe's Lip Repair. It's all-day moisture in one use and is guaranteed relief for extremely dry, cracked lips. Thanks to O'Keeffe's, I got my lips back.
It's the year-end sale at Mattress Firm. Don't miss savings of up to $600 when you get a king bed for the price of a queen and a queen for the price of a twin. Like a Serta Perfect Sleeper Queen mattress, now just $4.99. Plus, take home a free adjustable base. And don't miss out on our hot buy. The Sleepy's Memory Foam Queen mattress, now just $3.99. Don't wait. Stop by to try your perfect bed today. Your budget stretches further at Mattress Firm.
Payments for Social Security, Morgan & Morgan wins more than the national average. And we can say that because it's true. That means when you hire our lawyers, you have a better chance of winning than the average lawyer. And that's a really big deal. When you're injured and need a lawyer, the law firm you choose makes a big difference. Choose wisely. There's only one Morgan & Morgan. ForThePeople.com.
Hi.
Hi. Patience. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Watch Richard Ransom weeknights at 5, 6, and 10. You're watching Local 24 This Week with Richard Ransom.
All right, this last segment I'm calling a City Council's Last Stand because we know that we're losing a number of the faces that are on City Council. The new folks will be sworn in early next year, and as part of their outgoing gift, I guess, to the people of Memphis, City Council approving some rate increases that will cost, if all is said and done, probably more than $125, $130 a year out of the average Memphian. But as we know, there was the increase in the trash fee, some $7 a month. They agreed to increase MLGW's rates for gas and water, but not electricity. That was tabled, I guess, for now. Alcohol in the zoo. We can buy a drink at the zoo. And the residency referendum will take place in November. People will get to vote on whether cops and firefighters and other employees can live outside Memphis and Shelby County. So let's talk about the rate increases first. People never like to hear about their rates going up. I get it. But you had a political masterstroke by Jim Strickland on the trash pickup fee. I think we'd agree with that. And what do you think is going on with MLGW?
Well, as far as the trash pickup, that was a masterstroke on his part. He did it for political reasons early on in the year, using $15 million from the general fund to pay for it, but that money is going to run out. So we had to have a rate increase, and by threatening to lay off workers, the city council had no choice but to approve this rate increase because people like to have their trash picked up. That's one thing. As far as the MLGW thing is concerned, they have been begging for this rate increase for quite a while. I think that if this city council had not done it, the new city council that's coming in January would not have done any of it because I think this new council is probably a little bit more sympathetic to what's going on in a lot of the neighborhoods. They're a little bit more sympathetic to people who just can't afford those kind of rate increases, and they would probably be saying in much greater numbers, MLGW, you need to go back to the table and look for some other ways to cut this. Although, having said that, people don't like for their utility to be cut off whenever there is a thunderstorm.
But by not granting a rate increase for electricity, is the city council, the outgoing city council, sending a message to MLGW, you need to carefully look at this option of choosing another source than the TVA?
I think that's part of it as well.
Well, It's just unfortunate, Richard, Otis, that the positions that I usually take, and for people who are the least of these, who have to approach life day to day, check to check, those positions are always pushed to the back. We never, ever get into these substantive discussions. I don't mean we, literally. I mean Memphis and politics. We never get into the weeds when it's time to give grants to corporations, pilots. We never, never, never ask these questions.
But we do. You're right.
Again, I don't mean us literally, but we have got at some point to begin to deal with the tax base, the shrinking tax base of this city, the majority of people who are not being well educated, the majority of people who are having to move to the poverty rolls. At some point, we're going to have to stop punting on this and try to deal with it in a substantive way. I'm sad that I have to say, well, yeah, I guess we had to raise the MLG. When are we going to do something to increase the viability of the economics of the majority of Memphis, which is black and poor?
I can't say that I disagree. Excuse me. I can't say that I disagree with anything that Ken just said. I have said in the past that a lot of these tax incentives for these companies are necessary, they think, to spur economic growth in this community, but we do need to look at that vis-a-vis what we're doing to the least of those among us who have to foot the bill most of the time.
Think about it. All these years of pilots, all these years of tax breaks for corporations, and you mean we still are dealing with this many people who can't afford a $7 a month increase for garbage pickup, who can't afford a $100 a month or a year, whatever it is, increase in MLG&W? Something is wrong with that.
Yeah. All right, we'll have to leave it there. We'll be back to wrap things up right after this.
Everyone who has ever lived has lived here. All of mankind's triumphs and failures. Every moment, every hometown, all here. We start our coverage on the ground and take it to the airwaves, so you always know what's happening in your own world and beyond. We are free TV and radio. We are breaking news. We are always there. We are broadcasters.
So I went to Lowe's and got some shelves.
Doing it right runs in the family. So Lowe's has hard-working brands like DeWalt, Cobalt, and Craftsman, because you can bring the holidays together, even if you're apart. Get a Craftsman Mechanics tool set for $99. Do it right for less. Start with Lowe's.
Not removed. Help protect your home with CSL, the creosote sweeping log. It helps clean your chimney while it burns. Inside your chimney walls, there's a constant buildup of flammable tar and creosote. The active minerals in CSL will reduce those dangerous deposits, making your next fire safer. It's so easy. Burn just once every 60 fires. CSL, the creosote sweeping log.
Get CSL. Available at Lowe's, Ace, True Value, and Walmart.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But I get it, you're busy, and busy people can't have prediabetes. I read that wrong. They can, okay. Just go to the site.
Get in. Look at me, boys. I need to get rid of some hair. Oh, man. What do you think? Shorter, please. Shorter.
I will stand. I will help you through when you've done all you can do. You can't
being there. Pass it on.
I will dry your eyes.
Always like to hear your opinion about the broadcast. rransom at localmemphis.com, rransom at localmemphis.com. Be sure to join us next week when my panel will be assessing what was the story of the year and what they think will be the story next year. Thanks to everyone for being here. We'll see you next time. Merry Christmas.